A teacher paid for a student's exam. Now he's the dean of her university. Take the money. It's not charity, it's a promise, she whispered, sliding a crumpled 50 across the staff room table. Her fingers shook, but her gaze didn't waver. Sit the exam. Noah, that was 12 years ago. Now the university's email servers buzzed with the announcement, Welcome Dean Noah Reyes. The same corridors. The same cracked floor tiles that carry generations of tired feet. And the same woman, still in her faded gray cardigan, still counting exam forms at dawn under buzzing fluorescent lights. The boy she once believed in had returned no longer a trembling 17-year-old, but as dean. Rain streaked the quad that morning, each drop bouncing against stone like the measured ticking of a clock. Students crossed with umbrellas tilted at odd angles, their laughter rising and falling in the distance. Some hurried with exam booklets pressed to their chests, others dawdled with coffee cups in hand. From the back seat of a black sedan, Noah Reyes stepped out. 34 years old, newly appointed dean. His polished shoes met the wet pavement, and for a moment he just stood there, feeling the drizzle dampen his neatly combed hair. He adjusted his tie with fingers that trembled once before he caught them still. A photographer lifted a camera. Flash. Another flash. Department chairs lined the entrance, smiles carefully measured for the occasion. A voice boomed, Dean Reyes this way. Noah walked forward, but his eyes betrayed him, glancing towards the shadowed end of the corridor. Past the marble foyer, past the glass display case of medals and plaques, the same one that had never carried his photograph. There beneath the flickering exit sign sat a figure too familiar to ignore. Ms. Ruth Albright. She was arranging exam sheets into stacks of 30 lips, moving silently as she counted. Her cardigan was frayed at the elbow. Her hair, streaked with silver, was tied loosely at the back. To everyone else, she was another lecturer preparing for another long day. To Noah, she was the axis on which his whole life had turned. The sight of her sliced through him, memory rising like chalk dust. 12 years earlier, the bursar's office had been closing in 6 minutes. Noah remembered staring at the glass window, watching the clerk shuffle papers impatiently. His pockets held nothing but a bus ticket and the cracked leather wallet his father had given him. The exam fee, small to most, had been a mountain to him. Without it, he would forfeit his scholarship. Without the scholarship, the door to university would slam shut. He had asked 3 friends for help. He had pawned his old phone. Nothing was enough. At 11:54 a.m., despair pressed down like iron. He almost turned away, ready to let the dream collapse. That was when Ruth appeared. She was carrying a bundle of lesson plans, chalk still smeared on her fingers. She saw the boy leaning against the wall, eyes hollow, hands clenched. How much, she asked quietly. He couldn't answer. Shame burned too deep. Without waiting, she reached into her purse, pulled out a $50 note, crumpled, worn soft at the edges, and pressed it into his palm. Pay me back when you can. Or never, she said. Just promise me you'll sit that exam. It was more than money. It was oxygen. He had taken it. He had sat the exam. And when the results came, his scholarship carried him forward until the city changed around him and doors began to open at the sound of his name. Now, Dean Reyes, the board is waiting. The provost's voice pulled him back to the present. Noah nodded, but his gaze lingered on Ruth. She didn't look up. She was still counting. 30. The exam that almost never happened. The classroom was overcrowded that year. Desks crammed shoulder to shoulder, the air thick with chalk dust, and the restless sighs of students rehearsing formulas under their breath. The exam was whispered about like a gatekeeper. One paper that decided who would move forward and who would vanish quietly into the statistics of failure. In the back row sat Maya de la Cruz, her notebook thin, its pages patched with taped corners where she'd recopied borrowed notes. She was brilliant, yes, but brilliance rarely paid registration fees. Her mother worked at the market selling fruit before dawn until her voice went hoarse. Her father drove a city bus, his hands thick with calluses from decades of gripping a wheel. Their wages kept food on the table, but exam fees, even modest ones, were a luxury the family couldn't afford. Maya knew it. The final deadline for payment came like a storm she couldn't stop. On the morning of registration, she stood in line at the bursar's office, her palms clammy, her empty wallet clutched so tightly it left marks in her skin. When her turn came, she placed her ID card on the counter. "Maya de la Cruz," she said softly. The clerk, a man with wire-rimmed glasses and an expression carved from stone, typed her name. "Fee?" he asked. Maya swallowed. I don't have it yet. But if I could just—" His sigh was sharp practiced. No fee, no registration. Next. Her chest caved. Heat spread behind her eyes. She gathered her ID card, fingers shaking, and turned toward the door. Each step felt like betrayal of herself, of her parents, who had believed she might be the first in the family to finish university. That was when a voice called out, "Wait." She turned. At the far end of the corridor, a man was hurrying down the hall, tie loosened shirt sleeves rolled up as though he had been running between classes. Mr. Jonathan Hale, her literature teacher. The one who stayed late after lessons to mark essays carefully, who scribbled notes in margins that felt more like conversations than corrections. The one who told her once that her words carried more weight than she realized. He approached the counter, catching his breath. "How much is the fee?" he asked the clerk. The man with glasses frowned. "200. Jonathan didn't hesitate. He reached into his wallet and pulled out bills worn and folded from use. He counted them slowly, each note laid flat on the counter, as if the act itself was deliberate defiant. "Register her," he said. The clerk raised an eyebrow. "Faculty aren't permitted." "Register her," Jonathan repeated, firmer this time. His eyes, usually gentle, carried steel. Maya froze. "Sir, I can't let you." "You can," Jonathan interrupted softly. He turned to her. His voice lowered so only she could hear. "All you need to do is sit that exam. Nothing else. Don't waste this." Her throat tightened. The world seemed to tilt, every sound blurring. The silent years passed. Maya left home with one suitcase, its zipper rusted and stubborn, and a scholarship letter folded in her front pocket until the creases nearly tore through. The bus carried her away from the fruit stalls and narrow streets of her childhood into the wide, noisy arteries of the city. University was nothing like she imagined. The campus stretched with stone buildings older than her grandparents, their windows echoing with voices in languages she barely knew. Students rushed past in tailored uniforms, earbuds tucked into ears, laptops glowing late into the night. Maya felt like an intruder in borrowed shoes, but she endured. She lived in a dormitory where the paint peeled in strips and the pipes clanged at dawn. She ate instant noodles, rotating flavors, until even the smell of powdered seasoning made her stomach twist. Half her stipend she sent home to her parents. The other half bought books she couldn't borrow fast enough from the library. She studied. She studied until her eyes burned and her fingers cramped. She wrote essays on borrowed paper, underlining words 3 times when her hand wavered. She believed that every mark on every page was proof that Mr. Hale's sacrifice had not been in vain. But Jonathan disappeared. In her second year, rumors spread like smoke. He had resigned, some said. Others whispered about arguments with administration, about financial irregularities, about inappropriate aid to students. The details blurred, distorted by gossip and silence. What remained clear was this: his name no longer appeared on the faculty roster. Maya checked once, then again, weeks later, when the ache still pressed at her chest. She typed Jonathan Hale into the university directory, into the alumni portal, even into early search engines at the library. Nothing. As if he had been erased. At first, she told herself she would find him later, when her own position was stronger, when she had something to offer in return. But the years gathered too quickly, rolling one into the next. Graduation. She wore a gown that dragged against the concrete. Her parents wept quietly in the back row, their clothes too plain against the sea of pressed blazers and shimmering dresses. She walked across the stage, diploma in hand, her name spoken into the microphone for the first time in public recognition. Yet as applause rose, her eyes searched the crowd, aching for one face. He wasn't there. That night, she placed the faded exam receipt on her desk. Its ink had dulled the paper, soft and fragile. She slid it into a plastic sleeve, not to preserve it, but to protect herself from the fear that one day it might crumble. Their first meeting again present. The university's main hall smelled of polish and paper. Rows of chairs lined up with military precision banners hanging stiffly from the rafters. Welcome, Dean Reyes. The podium gleamed beneath stage lights, its wood buffed to a shine, as though the room itself were determined to look its best for the new era. Faculty members filled the front rows, whispering in low tones. Students lingered in the back, curious, craning their necks to see the man whose rise was already circulating in articles from scholarship student to dean in record time. When Noah walked onto the stage, applause erupted. He adjusted his tie, nodded politely, delivered the speech he had rehearsed: resilience, innovation, the future of education. His voice carried steady, each phrase polished like glass. But behind his measured tone, he scanned the room, searching. And then he saw her, Maya. She was seated near the aisle, notebook, open, pen tapping softly against the page. Her hair, once tied in hurried knots, now framed her face in deliberate waves. Her clothes were neat, but modest, as if she had dressed with care and restraint. Their eyes met. A flicker, brief, sharp, electric. Noah faltered for half a second, his throat tightening. But he pressed on, finishing his remarks to applause that felt strangely distant. After the ceremony, crowds swirled in the foyer. Students congratulated him, shaking hands. Trustees cornered him with questions about policy and budget. Cameras flashed. But Noah's attention kept slipping, his gaze drifting over heads and shoulders, until finally, there, she was standing near a column, half hidden, her arms crossed as if shielding herself from the noise. Noah excused himself, weaving through the crowd until he reached her. Maya, he said softly. She looked up, startled. For a moment, she searched his face like a puzzle. Then her lips curved into a smile that was not entirely warm. Dean Reyes, she said, emphasizing the title. The formality cut sharper than kindness. It's been years, Noah managed. His voice carried both wonder and guilt. Years, she repeated. Her pen tapped against the edge of her notebook. And yet, here we are. Same campus. Different places. He hesitated. I didn't know you were still here. I never left. The words landed flat, almost defiant. Silence stretched between them. In it lived the ghosts of exams hallways, the narrow gap between survival and collapse. Finally, she tilted her head. Congratulations. You made it farther than most of us ever dreamed. Because of him, Noah said quietly, her eyes sharpened. You remember? How could I forget? The weight in his voice made her look away, scanning the crowd. Funny thing about memory. It doesn't pay bills. It doesn't erase records. Noah frowned. What do you mean? Maya hesitated. Her hand slipped into her notebook fingers, brushing against something tucked in the sleeve. The brittle exam receipt, edges yellowed, numbers fading. She didn't show it. Not yet. Instead, she asked, Do you know what happened to Mr. Hale? Noah's silence was answer enough. Maya's eyes darkened. Old debts resurface. Present. The dean's office carried a strange silence at night. The walls, newly painted, smelled faintly of varnish. Outside the window, the quad glimmered, under lamplight, a handful of students hurrying across with backpacks slung low. Inside, the only sound was the hum of the air conditioner and the restless tapping of Noah's pen against a blank page. On his desk lay stacks of reports, enrollment numbers, budget proposals, faculty disputes. He read none of them. His eyes were fixed on a file pulled from the archives earlier that day. It was thin, one page stapled to a reprimand slip. The header, in block letters, Disciplinary Action Jonathan Hale. The ink was blunt, clinical violation of financial policy. Unlawful assistance to student, termination of contract. Beneath a signature scrawled with impatient flourish, the former provost's. Noah closed his eyes. The words were too sterile for the act they described. It wasn't unlawful assistance. It was a man sliding bills across a counter so that a student could sit an exam, breathe live. He pushed the file aside and leaned back, rubbing his temples. The echoes of memory returned unbidden. Past. It had been late afternoon when Jonathan caught up with him after class. Noah had been ready to disappear, shame gnawing at him, certain he would have to abandon his scholarship because he couldn't pay the fee. Jonathan's voice had been low but insistent. Don't walk away from this. Not now. Then that folded bill pressed into his palm. Warm, trembling. A lifeline, disguised as paper. Sit the exam, Jonathan said. That's all I ask. The memory played like a recording stuck on repeat. Noah had carried that moment in the lining of his chest for years, but he had never known the cost it exacted on the man who gave it. Present, a knock broke the silence. The door opened, and Maya stepped in. She carried a folder tucked beneath her arm, her face pale under the fluorescent light. You've been digging, she said, without preamble. Noah gestured at the chair opposite. Sit. She didn't. What do you hope to find? A way to erase what happened. He swallowed. I owe him my life. Maya's laugh was sharp. Then you're 12 years too late. They dismissed him, branded him reckless. He left without a word. Noah looked at the file again. Where did he go? No one knows. She tightened her grip on the folder. Some say he teaches at a small community center. Others say he left the city altogether. He vanished, Noah. That's what happens when an institution decides your kindness is a liability. Her bitterness cracked something in him. You kept the receipt, didn't you? He asked quietly. Maya froze. Then slowly she opened her folder and pulled it out. The slip of paper, yellowed edges curled the stamp, barely legible. She placed it on his desk. This is all that remains, she said. Her voice trembled, but she forced it steady. A fragment of a choice that ruined him and saved us. Noah reached forward, fingertips brushing the paper. The years collapsed between them, confronting the institution. Present. The boardroom was a theater of glass and steel. A long mahogany table stretched beneath the glow of recessed lights, polished until it reflected every anxious hand placed upon it. Around it, sat the senior faculty, administrators, and trustees, their faces carefully, blank their pens, poised as if ready to sign away another piece of history. At the head of the table, Noah adjusted his jacket and cleared his throat. The air felt thicker here, heavy with the weight of policy and precedent. Before we begin with budget allocations, he said evenly, there is a matter we must revisit. The rustle of papers paused. A few eyebrows arched. Noah placed the disciplinary file at the center of the table. The single page looked almost pathetic against the gleam of the wood. Jonathan Hale, he said. The name landed like a stone in water, rippling through the room. Some shifted in their seats. Others averted their gaze, suddenly fascinated with their notes. He was dismissed 12 years ago, said Dr. Pembroke, the oldest trustee voice, clipped. The case is closed. Noah leaned forward. It was not a case. It was a punishment for compassion. He paid an exam fee for a student who had no other means. That act was labeled misconduct. Murmurs flickered around the table. A dean was not supposed to disturb old wounds, not in his first weeks. Dean Reyes Pembroke said sharply, "Our policies exist to maintain fairness. If we allowed faculty to pay for students, where would we draw the line?" Fairness. Noah's voice rose steady but edged. Fairness would have been ensuring no student had to choose between hunger and opportunity. Fairness would not have destroyed a man's career for an act of kindness. Dr. Liu, head of sciences, adjusted her glasses. "What exactly are you proposing? An apology?" "Acknowledgement," Noah said. "Restoration." His record cleared. His contribution recognized. Silence fell. Someone tapped a pen nervously. Another coughed. Finally, Professor Ellis leaned back in his chair. "You risk destabilizing the institution. If we admit fault, we invite scrutiny, perhaps even lawsuits. Do you want headlines that say this university punished a teacher for helping a student?" Noah met his gaze without flinching. "Yes, because that is the truth. And the world deserves to know it." Later in the hallway, Maya waited by the elevators, arms crossed, watching faculty exit in uneasy clusters. When Noah approached, she raised an eyebrow. "You stirred the hornet's nest," she said. They needed to hear it. They heard. But will they act? Institutions are not people. Noah, they don't repent. They protect themselves. He exhaled, shoulders sagging. "Then I'll force their hand." Maya studied him for a long moment. "You're dean now. You could choose safety, comfort. Yet here you are risking it for a ghost." "He's not a ghost," Noah said quietly. "Not to me. Not to you." Her gaze softened just slightly. "Then you'd better be ready, because they'll push back harder than you think." The return of Jonathan Hale. Present. 2 weeks after Noah's letter, the university buzzed with whispers. Something was happening. Secret meetings, trustees arguing in corners, students catching fragments in hallways. A name they had never heard before repeated with unease, Jonathan Hale. Noah knew the resistance would be fierce. The provost called him reckless, warned that dragging the past into the light would destabilize the institution. But Noah didn't flinch. He had lived his youth under the weight of silence. He wouldn't let it dictate his adulthood. Then, one damp afternoon, he received an envelope slid under his office door. No return address. Inside was a single sheet. Jonathan Hale, current address. The handwriting was rough-hurried, but it was enough. The meeting. The house stood at the edge of town, weather-beaten, its porch sagging under years of neglect. A stray cat darted from beneath the steps when Noah climbed them. He knocked. The door opened slowly, revealing a man, older, thinner lines, carved deep into his face. His hair, once chestnut, had turned iron gray. But the eyes, sharp, steady, were unmistakable. Noah, Jonathan said, voice low, almost disbelieving. For a moment, neither moved. Then Noah stepped forward and, without thinking, embraced him. The contact was awkward, unexpected, but real. When they sat inside, the room smelled faintly of dust and old books. Stacks of lesson plans were piled on a table. A chalkboard leaned against the wall, its surface covered with neat equations. "You're still teaching," Noah said softly. "Community classes," Jonathan replied. "Adults drop out anyone who wants to learn. They can't take that from me." Noah's chest tightened. "I found the file. The reprimand. You lost everything because of me." Jonathan shook his head. "Not because of you. Because I chose. And I'd do it again." "But they branded you reckless," Noah said. His voice cracked. "You deserved gratitude. Instead, you got exile." Jonathan's gaze softened. "And you, what did you get?" Noah hesitated. The silence answered for him. Opportunity degrees, the title of dean. All built on that one act of defiance. "I can't carry this title knowing what it cost you," Noah whispered. "I've demanded they clear your record. They'll fight it, but I won't stop." Jonathan leaned back, a weary smile tugging at his lips. "You don't owe me this." "I do," Noah said firmly. "Because the boy you saved became the man who can finally fight back." That's the circle. Back on campus, the trustees convened again, this time with Jonathan present. He walked into the boardroom wearing his old corduroy jacket, shoulders straight despite the years. Murmurs rippled through the room, astonishment, unease, a flicker of shame. Noah introduced him. "This is the man who believed in students when policy didn't. This is the man you cast aside." Jonathan said little. "Only this: I gave $50 to a student who could not afford resolution." Present. The notice appeared quietly, without ceremony. A sheet of paper pinned to the university's bulletin board near the main library. Students walked past it without slowing their laughter, rising above the clatter of footsteps. But for those who paused, the words carried the weight of history. "Disciplinary record expunged, effective immediately. Faculty Jonathan Hale." No speeches, no trumpet of apology. Just an acknowledgement, stark and official, printed in black ink. Maya stood in front of it, trembling, her hand lifted slowly, tracing the letters. For 12 years, she had carried the receipt like a relic, the only proof that kindness once outweighed bureaucracy. Now the institution itself admitted it had been wrong. Tears stung her eyes. But they weren't tears of sorrow. They were release. Behind her, voices rose. Students reading the notice aloud, asking who Jonathan Hale was. Some shrugged and walked on. Others lingered, intrigued. Maya smiled faintly. The story was awakening, moving from whisper to echo, from silence to legacy. Jonathan walked across the quad. The sun fell warm across his shoulders. He looked almost out of place amid the tide of students with earbuds and phones. Yet when they glanced his way, some paused, sensing something unspoken in the steady man who carried himself without regret. He reached the bulletin board. His eyes scanned the notice, lips pressing together. No triumph showed on his face. Only a quiet stillness, as if the world had finally corrected its balance by a fraction. Noah stood a few steps behind, watching. "You deserved more than a piece of paper," Noah said softly. Jonathan turned his gaze steady. "Sometimes a piece of paper is enough. It tells the truth, and truth endures." Noah's chest tightened. "I wanted an apology for you, a ceremony, a speech." Jonathan shook his head gently. "Noah, this isn't about noise. It's about memory. They can't erase what was done, but they can no longer deny it. That is enough. Later in Ruth's office, the walls glowed in the afternoon light. Papers lay scattered on her desk, but her attention was fixed on a plastic sleeve. Inside the old receipt rested fragile, faded, yet still legible. She placed it carefully between the pages of her journal, sealing it as one seals a relic. Jonathan sat opposite her, his hands folded. "You kept it all these years," he murmured. She nodded. "Because it reminded me that my life wasn't mine alone. That someone believed when no one else did." Jonathan's eyes softened. "And now you teach. You pass."